So the Doughnut Design for Business tool, it lives in the DoughnutEconomics.org platform. This is the page that it lives within. And as you can see, you can go through a whole host of things here, including the slides themselves. So by clicking here, you can see the Google slides. You can get to the PDF version if you prefer a simpler version there. Both are available. We also have a video on the page that you can use to introduce the concept. So if you're interested in introducing them yourselves, that's absolutely fine. We've got the slides available and some guidance there for you to present the ideas and concepts behind Doughnut Economics, especially as it relates to business. But if you'd like to use a pre-recorded video with the key concepts explained in a tight way, we've also created that for you. It's available on YouTube or on Vimeo as well. If you are frustrated by some of the adverts on YouTube, we also have a Vimeo version that there's a link to in the actual tool. As I mentioned, we have a paper that accompanies the tool as well. And this paper is really full of very important information and context. It was co-authored by a number of us, including Kate Rayworth and her co-creator, co-founder of Doughnut Economics Action Lab, Carlota Sanz, who's also with us here today, as well as some of our key partners in generating these tools and testing and piloting this at the Center for Economic Transformation in Amsterdam. So you can click through here to read the paper. And as mentioned, the translations are all available: French, German, Portuguese, and Spanish, both of the core tool and of the paper as well. In those languages. And then there's a bit more information below about who it's for, how long it takes, the format, and what you'll need in order to facilitate a workshop. So every time we talk about a tool here, we're talking essentially about a guide to running a workshop with businesses, or a workshop within your own business. It can be with one person, it can be with many more people. It's really quite adaptable in that way. We also have here a bit more information about DEALs policy around businesses, how to associate publicly, some do's and don'ts that also are repeated in the tool as well. So do take a look at those. Now, before I proceed, I'll give a quick also sense of who this is for and how to register. So we have something called Organizations in Action. You can click through it here, but also to show you where it lives on the DEAL website. If we go to the main page, we can go to the community, and within the DEAL community, we have organizations in action that are listed. And these are the organizations that have registered with Doughnut Economics Action Lab in order to use our tools. Now for business, anyone running workshops for businesses, other than their own, other than for internal reflection. So if you're a consultant or an organization running workshops for multiple businesses that are not ones you work in, we ask you to register here, and we make sure that only values-aligned organizations are using this in the most ambitious way that protects the integrity of the concept. So we've got more information here on all of this. If you go to the top and submit an application, it takes you through to just a short form to fill out in order to be listed and be able to use this tool with other businesses. So that is the main intro to the broader aspects of the tool. I'm now going to jump straight into the tool itself and talk through some of the logic and the background and the context for how we created and why we think there's a specific way it particularly works. So I'll use the version of this, which is the Google Slides version, and hopefully, great. So this is what you see. This is the tool, and it includes a whole bunch of things. Importantly, it's got various parts to it, 4 parts. We're only covering the first 2 parts today. So the first half of this core tool, which is around rapid donut mapping and regenerative and distributive ambitions. The second half will be covered on the 26th of July through very similar training webinars. And there we will focus on this concept of enterprise design that is very much at the heart of this tool. Now we've got links here to various things. Do have a look at the annexes at the back, because there's some very useful information in there. I'm just going to click through to give you a sense of it. For instance, we have all of the canvases available for the activities that I will be introducing over the next 40 minutes. So these are essentially the canvases for the first two parts is the donut itself, and we work on that, but it's available as a Miro board. If you're doing an online workshop, it's available as a PDF if you're printing it out and doing it in person. We've also got other key aspects here. For instance, the skills that we think are important in order to run these workshops. We've got how to identify the right people to be in the workshop. It's important to get the right kind of organizations and individuals who both have a level of agency and a level of ambition, for instance, in order to drive the kind of change that we hope emerges from this. We also have some specific insights on how to run it with startups, for instance, the importance of the role of investors in that early stage of businesses is going to be quite an important topic that we highlight. How to run it with larger companies and some of the dynamics of the right levels and the right kind of people to include from larger companies. How to run it with family companies, the importance, for instance, of the legacy or the key focus of the philanthropic contributions of the family in trying to define some of the direction of this workshop to make it a success. How to run it with existing ethical businesses who may already consider themselves an ethical business, whether they're a social enterprise or other kind of business that is focused on ethical products, services, or impacts, and some specific things around how to run it in person, how to run it online as well. And we've also got some sample workshop agendas or programs in here too. So how you might apportion the time in order to get through all of this, in this case in 5 hours, but it could be condensed to as little as 4 in order to run through this version of it. Now, the taster version is a bit shorter. It's significantly shorter, and it's been cut down in a number of ways. Essentially focuses on a shorter version of part 2, as well as a combined version of parts 3 and 4. So it's only a 2-step process in the taster version, and that's between 1 to 2 hours in order to run it. Whereas this one, the core version, is 4 to 5 hours in order to run it. We've also got here some guidance on responding to common questions, like, the role of legal forms, the role of certifications, etc. Some of these also overlap with what's underlined in our broader policies. And we've got some asks of any users around how to share back. Facilitators summarizing their reflections, because we are very keen to foster and support a community of practice around this. So those that are using these tools, we really hope that there's a way that they also input and share back their suggestions and their learnings, as well as how to create case studies and how businesses can publicly communicate around all of this. So that is a quick run through of what's included in the tool. Now I'm just going to jump straight back up to the beginning of the tool. So this is all available publicly. Everything I'm presenting, you can have access to it. In fact, some of you may already be in this. So we're hoping that this is a helpful way to sort of go through it so that you can play with this yourself to access all of the same information. So I will keep going through this. The core workshop, as I mentioned, has got 4 parts to it. The first 2 is what we're working on at the moment, what we'll be going through in this discussion. Around rapid donut mapping, and then coming up with regenerative and distributive ambitions that are linked to the impacts of the business that have been identified in part 1. And then we pivot from there to knowing the design of the business and how the deep design of the business plays out with these sorts of ideas, and stress testing how it enables or holds back these kinds of ideas before moving on to the final part on how do we redesign businesses in order to enable and unlock the most ambitious version of these kinds of ideas that are being generated. So that's the general gist of it. And as I mentioned, 26th of July, we'll be going through parts 3 and 4. Today's only part 1 and 2. So we've got a bit more of an introduction here into what you might need to know before you start, around some skills, around some things that we don't cover in depth. For instance, having aspects of individual leadership, and there are some other frameworks we mention here as well, and some of the what's included later on. And we've got the do's and don'ts. And to highlight a couple of key ones here, we asked people to use the entirety of the tool when they're using it. They can, of course, do other activities around it, but the sequencing of the tool itself is really important. And that's why we created a shorter version. When there was a demand to do this in a quicker format, we created a taster version, which could be done in as little as 1 hour. But we do recommend giving a bit more time for some of the questions that emerge. We also ask that people don't publish company donuts. This isn't a way to frame the performance of a company or try to allocate what is the right amount of biodiversity loss a company should have, or what's the amount of gender inequality a company should be generating or tolerating. That's not the focus of donut economics as it relates to business, and it's very much focused on what I'm about to present. So, part 1, rapid donut mapping. Now, this is really important because it is a very early way that businesses can interact with the donut. We've got at the beginning of it some links, for instance, to the video that I mentioned. So if you click on that link, that takes you to the Vimeo link where we've got the content presented, and you can choose to play that content. We've also got links here to the paper that we feel is quite important to give you background on it, as well as links to the canvases. So even though earlier I showed you, you can go to the end, to the annexes to find the right links to the activity canvases, you can also find them at the beginning of each part as well. So this section, this intro part, is really for the facilitator. The participants don't need to click through any of these. They don't need to read any of this. They could if they choose to. It's in the public domain, but it's really as background for the facilitator, what we think the facilitator might need to do to prepare for this part of the workshop. We ask you to introduce the donuts, and we've got some very specific language about what it is. And of course, you can draw from other publications around the donut that we've put out as well here. And we also ask you to underline that the world is far out of balance at the moment, that we are both falling short on life's essentials and we're in overshoot on the planet's boundaries. So that's a very important, usually quite a striking moment for a lot of the participants who might have heard of donut economics, might have forgotten around how we are doing as humanity in relation to the planetary boundaries and the social foundations that are at the heart of the donut and donut economics. And often it's an important moment to sort of pause and reflect on the fact that this is underlining a need for very significant transformation in our economies and societies more broadly. It's also important here to set quite important key expectations. Like, what are participants expecting from this part? As I mentioned, it's not about quantifying your performance. We're not going to create a company donut that looks like this to say, here's where you're in significant overshoot, here's where you're within the donut. It's not about telling them sort of, what their specific goals should be numerically, quantitatively. It's really about stretching the ambition of the businesses in order to help humanity into the donut and unlocking the needed actions. And it's very action oriented. What are the actions needed from companies rather than an assessment of their performance? And what would it take to unlock those most effective actions, the most ambitious actions possible? We then, immediately after introducing the donuts and the overshoots and shortfall that's happening currently globally, we jump straight in actually to interacting and engaging with the donut. And here we have this activity where we ask people to initially identify the positive impacts they have. So with green, identify how they're helping humanity move into the donut. And with red, how are their business contributing to the social and ecological pressure that can be captured in the donut. We also have a third question as a part of this activity, which is, how do we identify where social and ecological pressures create risks or impacts for the business? Of course, climate change, for instance, is a risk for so many businesses, but also is sort of peace and justice. So is social equity in terms of stability of societies and economies. So there are lots of aspects. There could be more specific things as well around water shortages or fresh water withdrawals, for instance, or pollution that could make a significant impact on the business itself. So we also ask them to, in the language of a lot of materiality assessments, to also look at where they have dependencies on these dimensions of the donut, not just how they are impacting the dimensions of the donut. Now, we ask them to do this, and they end up with think something like this, where they end up putting a whole load of qualitative assessments on where they think they are having impacts on the world and society around them. And what this often serves to do is a number of things. It firstly helps them identify things that are a bit broader than they might otherwise consider. Most of the businesses that we've engaged with are aware of 2 or 3 important impact areas that they focus on. They can talk about those positive or negative impacts on different areas. However, they often miss a broader perspective. They often miss or don't focus so much on other issues. And sometimes their attention is driven by where there is greatest risk, or there is greatest profile, or there is greatest sort of social pressure or news coverage of certain issues that may or may not be the most impactful areas for them to really focus on. So here we really try to broaden out the thinking here, rather than just focusing on a couple of the high profile issues. And they discover interesting things and often contradictory things. So for instance, this example of a consumer goods company is at the same time they're creating some good jobs through their own operations. They also have extremely low wages in their supply chain. They might be taking some important actions on ecological issues, but they're also contributing on a whole bunch as well. They're sort of selling some healthy and nutritious food, but in other areas, they might be having negative impacts on communities, for instance. So a lot of it is around sort of holding the complexity of the broad social and ecological impacts the business has, and then also recognizing that, hey, like climate change is a really big risk for this business. So is political instability manifested in peace and justice. So is freshwater withdrawals that can create drought risk and threaten their agricultural supply chains. So throughout this tool, throughout these workshops, the same examples occur. So we build on the same examples. Each part, we've got examples of activities, and then we have a consumer goods company and we follow through with the same one that we started with. We don't name the company, but it's one that we worked on. We also have a professional services example as well, all the way through. We know that consumer goods often has the highest profile in the sustainability field, for instance, more broadly, that the impacts can be a bit more material, it could be a bit more quantifiable, and consumers are often a bit more engaged on consumer goods products. But services can be more complicated to evaluate the social and ecological impact. So we worked hard to include a services example throughout this tool. And actually, when we unpacked it, we realized that, of course, any services, including professional services, which is the example here, does have an impact, often through their clients. So, you know, the climate impacts of their clients, as well as the climate risk that their clients face. Their clients also might face risks, for instance, on energy. They might, in their own operations, have some impacts as well, where, okay, they pay fairly well to their own staff beyond the living wage, but actually they have just adjacent to their direct operations, cleaners and drivers and contractors that are actually not directly employed by them, but are in very poor wage situations or poor livelihoods, for instance. So there's a whole host of social and ecological things that can be unpacked from a services company, just as a consumer goods company. And here, breadth is really critical, as well as recognizing where some of these might be the highest impact areas. And hopefully the discussion at this point starts to highlight, by opening up the broader aspects, they start to say, hey, look, our relationship with our clients is actually really important. That's where the rubber hits the road. If we go back to the consumer goods company, hey, actually 70-80% of our social ecological impacts are happening through our supply chains. So us focusing on our own operations may be more marginal compared to what's happening in our supply chain. How do we generate ideas for transforming our supply chain where most of that ecological and social impact is happening? And for, you know, I speculate that for many services companies, it's going to happen through their clients and their relationship with clients, for instance. It might be something else, but those are the kinds of realizations that we hope starts to emerge by mapping all of this out in a qualitative and broader way. So that's sort of a really critical beginning for this, because it allows people to interact and engage with the donut, broaden their perspectives. We then have a little bit of a wrap up that sort of reiterates what what we've just done, why we did it, why we did this activity, and then allows you to prepare them for the next activity. Now, these slides at the beginning and end of each part are not necessarily ones you have to show to the people in the room. You can choose to jump over them. These are for you and to help the facilitator, to give a sense of what we've done, what you might want to say at these points, but you can choose to have them up there as well and read them out. So it's very much optional how you use those wrap-up slides and the introductory slides. So also, before I move on to this part, the bit that I just presented, the part two, so sorry, part one, so this bit, this activity, the rapid donut mapping, this isn't in the taster version. The taster version jumps over this and goes straight to part two as the first activity. But we do underline in the taster tool the importance of thinking about what are the highest impact areas that the business currently has. Where are the areas where it has impact that it should be focusing, even though we don't do an activity around it. And of course, in order to shorten this from a 4 to 5 hour workshop to a 1 to 2 hour workshop, we lose some important aspects and steps. But that is how we try to mitigate that by just reminding the facilitators and reminding the participants that it is important now to think about where do you have greatest impact. And then we jump straight into regenerative and distributive ambitions. And this is quite important, and I would say is probably the most critical juncture in these workshops. If we can pitch this right, if we can give a sense of ambition, give a sense of permission to participants to think as big as possible, as scarily as possible about the kind of ideas that they can pursue and most transformative things they can think of, the rest of it flows much more effectively. You both set a scene where it's okay to think really big about the future of the economy and the industry and the business, as well as putting ideas on the table that can help us really stress test how does the design of the business handle the biggest, most transformative ideas possible. And again, it starts with this intro slide that gives a sense of what we're about to do, with some really important links for the facilitator on the right. Including that video I mentioned. Again, facilitators can choose to play the video or they can present the slides themselves, but the link is there to the Vimeo version of the video, as well as bits of the paper we mentioned and the canvases, both PDF and the Miro version, the online version as well, available. So we start with that, and then it's important here to also set expectations around what this activity is going to do. And this is why we begin with this content of what is broken and what is holding back business in the 20th century version of business. And really setting the expectation here that it's about stretching our ambition. It's about stretching ambition in order to identify some strategies, some transformations, some investments, some practices that may be considered unviable. They may be considered out of scope. People might even be called naive for coming up with the ideas we're about to try to explore together with the participants. But it's critical that we give that permission to people, and also allows people to come up with things that otherwise might not be able to do in a work setting. So setting the scene around that is quite critical. And then we paint this picture of how much financial value can we extract from this enterprise, being that 20th century question that has dictated and limited what is possible in the world of business. We set that scene as being a cause and an interrelation with degenerative and divisive ideas that I'll be introducing in a second. And we set then a more hopeful version, a vision for what business can be, which can be designed around how many benefits can we generate in the way we design this enterprise, which can enable and unlock regenerative and distributive dynamics in the business and the economy more broadly. So in order to set this scene with more substance, we then present the content underpinning it all. The journey from a degenerative economy and a degenerative model of doing business that is running down Earth's life supporting systems, which is using the take, make, use, lose model, towards a regenerative one that is working with and within the cycles of the living world. one that is drawing from inspiration from both circular economy. You can see a very simpler version of a circular economy diagram there, where there is biological material loops on the left and there are technical material loops on the right. But also is drawing significant inspiration from concepts like biomimicry. And I urge you to look at organizations like B3.8, the organization set up by Janine Benius, which has been a really important conceptual inspiration for a lot of this section of the tool, certainly. And to give it a little bit more feel and structure, we then give two examples. What does this mean? Why are we talking about moving towards regenerative? It's not just a buzzword, it's something that means quite a bit to a lot of us trying to practice donut economics. And essentially, we give two examples that hopefully are helpful. One is around moving from landscape degradation, so the current degenerative model of deforestation and degradation, towards and via a sustainable model, which is reducing deforestation, for instance, or getting to zero deforestation, all the way to a regenerative model that is restoring landscapes and repairing some of the damage we've done to ecosystems. And this, of course, draws from biomimicry in multiple ways, because when we look at nature, nature doesn't do zero harm. Nature doesn't do sustainable, it does regenerative. It creates balance, it creates benefits in multiple ways. So the regenerative step at the end that we're pinning as the goal goes far beyond most of the approaches in the world of sustainability, which are limited to reducing harm or minimizing harm. And the other example is, if we look at product design, how do we get beyond, of course, the built-in obsolescence, the designed obsolescence that is in so many products, that is creating huge amounts of unnecessary waste and destruction, and go beyond, for instance, initiatives, laudable initiatives that are trying to get to 100% recyclable products, all the way to designing products in a way that can be repaired, that can have modular product design at the heart of it, to really not just minimize, but eventually eliminate waste, and not necessarily rely on very energy intensive material recycling models, but go all the way to having long product life cycles that are achieving a far more balanced approach to in the relationship between humans, materials, and nature. So that's an example that we provide on the two that we provide to try to stretch the ambitions of individuals here, so that also hint quite deliberately that we need to go beyond the limits of sustainability and the concepts of sustainability that are not sufficient in getting to the final destination. We hope this is helpful. It might be a bit provocative for some that use terms like sustainability and sustainable with great pride in their work day to day. So it's important to recognize it's, not everyone using that terminology is limited. Some are doing great work, but a lot of those that are and using the terms could be stuck in that middle bit that isn't actually getting to regenerative. And that's hopefully a reflection that most in the room will share. Then we move to the social side. So we ask you to introduce here the move from divisive to distributive. How do we go from an economy where value and opportunity are captured in the hands of far few people to one that is deliberately distributed by design, that's sharing opportunity and value far more equitably with all who have co-created it. And similarly here, we want to disrupt the current debate that is celebrating sustainability and inclusivity as being sufficient. And here we give the examples, for instance, on wages, that yes, we need to go beyond poverty wages, out of poverty wages, via at least the living wage, where people are paid enough to meet their basic needs. But can we think bigger? Can we think much more distributively and think, how do we make sure that we get to a point where we're distributing the upside of business, for instance, far more broadly, far more equitably with all who have co-created the value that's been generated. Similarly, we look at the dynamic of competition in the world of business, and that really unlimited and unhinged competition that can emerge often and create a very aggressive dynamics. For instance, the aggressive enforcement of patents that limits collaboration across industries. And of course, there's a step in there of increasing partnerships that could emerge. But how do we take inspiration from the more distributive models, such as open source product design, That's an example of the technology company Drupal there. There's also other examples in the paper like Houdini that has open source, it's product designs, it's circular garment product designs. And there are others that are also following suit using open source ideas at the center of their business model. So that's quite an important bit of it as well for us to recognize that the journey here, the goal here is to think distributively, not just about including people into a system that is inherently flawed. And we then move towards unpacking, so what is stopping us? What is holding back some of the actions that we know we need to take? So we created these slides and this toolkit and guidance for this workshop that hopefully you'll be running based on 21 different pilot workshop series. And through that, we had over 300 companies in rooms with us, engaging on versions of this tool in different formats. Some of them were large companies, others were small, some were startups, some were established companies. We did it online, offline, and we learned a bit around, okay, what are the dynamics that emerge within a business that is held back from these sorts of ideas, and what are the dynamics that have emerged in the businesses that can unlock and enable and pursue these sorts of ideas. And what we found was a sense that, look, there's a whole bunch of businesses that are held back by outdated processes, by decision-making processes that can be very regressive, by very rigid financial targets that hold back some of the more ambitious ideas, by very short-term thinking, and by cultures of hierarchy that make it difficult for more junior people to put big ideas on the table, because they might be labeled naive, they might be labeled as not understanding the commercial realities of the business. So we noticed these dynamics emerge across all of our workshops. We also noticed a whole bunch of business leaders and individuals and businesses that felt liberated to put these ideas on the table. And what they were often doing is suspending practicality. They were able to say, look, this idea might not be viable with today's financial parameters, but let's not dismiss it. Let's put it on the table anyway. Let's see how far we can go by exploring it and entertaining possibilities around it. They also often brought in broader perspectives. They tended to have greater and stronger relationships with local communities, with human rights NGOs or ecological NGOs and their supply chain and business partners. They tended to have processes for already having heard a broader sense of perspectives, not just an internal discussion within a corporate. And that's something we heard time and time again in very honest reflections by those in leading sustainability roles in very large corporates, that, hey, the conversations are very internal. It's about the internal processes of the company. We don't engage very broadly outside of that. The other thing we of course saw was a sense that longer term thinking was not just permissible, but encouraged, that they would think about what would their industry look like in 10, 20, 30 years time, what would the world and their geographies and the market look like in the future. And that was very legitimate to bring in as a way to unpack what might be possible. And there was a culture of courage. People were actually encouraged to put big ideas on the table. Bigger ideas were celebrated, even if they weren't possible yet. So those were the kind of dynamics we saw. And this is the reason we have this, and we ask you to draw on this when you present it, is it allows people to maybe find themselves a little bit. They find themselves, oh, actually, we do have very rigid financial targets, or no, actually, we have a culture of courage. Let's build on that. So they could see some of the dynamics, some of the cultural dynamics within companies and some of the processes they might have that hold them back or enable them to pursue the kind of ideas we're about to now hopefully generate. So having set that scene, having given a bit of background to why we're now challenging them to come up with transformative ideas, we now move immediately to this activity, and we say, right, let's unpack them. Let's come up with these ideas. Now that we're in the right mindset, let's come up with the ideas that can help address the greater impact areas we've already thought about and identified in part one in rapid donut mapping. And here an individual idea might impact multiple areas, multiple dynamics or dimensions of the donut. It might impact air pollution and housing and biodiversity loss, for instance, hypothetically speaking. And often they do. The big ideas often do. The other point here is that when we introduce this, I suggest that you also try to take the pressure off around the implications of putting big ideas on the table. So this doesn't become an immediate to-do list. This is just a way to broaden our thinking, to have a safe space to put as many big ideas as possible that don't normally get an airing, that don't normally get a discussion. You're not going to be held to account on every single idea generated here. It's a process of liberating what might be possible, rather than creating processes of immediate accountability. So it doesn't have to be a to-do list. And I think I found that often that allows people to feel a bit more relaxed, to then go, okay, well, I can jot things down, and you know, even if it doesn't seem possible, it's, you know, because I don't want people then to hold me to account to do something that I identified that I wasn't sure I could ever do and achieve. That's okay. Let's put them down anyway, is the message we try to give, and it's been helpful. And then we move over to step one. And essentially step one is to visualize that future thriving economy. And it depends on the space, depends on the mood of the room. Sometimes it works quite well here to ask people to close your eyes and imagine that future economy. That future economy might be in 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. We weren't prescriptive here. It'll be artificial to put a date down, but we're talking about a time where we've transformed our economies. We've all become part of an economy that can live within the donut. We are all helping humanity live within the donut. What does that economy look like? And to start imagining, what does your market look like? What does your industry look like? What are you buying, selling? You know, how big is the business? Where does it reside? How does it operate? And really give people a sense of permission to imagine what this future could look like. And this is really critical juncture, because when people can really give themselves permission to do that, often the bigger ideas start to flow. If they're resistant to it, it becomes harder. So we've put a lot of effort here into drawing people into that perspective. And we ask two critical questions, central questions. What has your business started doing? What has it now stopped doing? Now, the stop doing question is really important. And often people can react to it a bit. They might feel it's a bit of an uncomfortable question, because so much of what the sustainability world has been trying to do is find ways to do what you're doing, but do it by becoming less bad. How do we stay who we are? How do we stay with the products, services, markets, operations we have? How do we stay on our trajectory of growth, of commercial sort of success, the way we've described it, and do things around it to mitigate the impacts we're having? And here we're trying to draw people out of that mindset of saying, you may end up doing things differently, you may do some things the same. However, there will be things you need to probably stop doing. Maybe it's discontinuing particular product lines. Maybe it's changing your operations from one thing to another. Maybe it's changing your geographies. Maybe it's moving away from particular clients that are unhelpful. Maybe it's no longer producing things but repairing them. Maybe it's renting products out rather than selling them. There could be a whole host of changes that mean that actually you've probably started doing some things and stopped doing some things. And if you're very honest with yourself, a lot of businesses are going to end up with pretty fundamental things they might need to stop doing in order to belong to a regenerative and distributive economy. We then also want to draw out here in this first step of part two, what might already be rattling around in their minds, what they might have already heard from activists in their sector or related to their sector, what they might have heard from junior colleagues that maybe they didn't process, or technical experts or industry leaders. And here it's really about drawing out what's already on the more ambitious edge of where they are. Now, you'll notice here we've got the same thing kind of bolded a couple of times, and it's not an accident. We've got at the bottom, think beyond what is currently feasible. This is really critical. If all they do is write down things that already they're very proud of, that they're doing or planning to do, or things that are just efficiencies that are possible within the current model, that are feasible within their current design, the rest of the workshop isn't going to work so effectively. It's really critical here that they also think beyond what's currently feasible in their commercial model, in their current enterprise design, and think about what might need to happen that is held back, that feels a bit scary, that feels a bit commercially challenging. It's highlighted on the left here as well. Critically consider ideas that don't currently seem practical or feasible. This is going to be pivotal. Now, this activity can be done through a discussion in a group or through quiet reflection. So you could certainly do this in terms of asking people, look, join a group, reflect for a few minutes individually, and then share and discuss with each other what you've come up with. Or you can just say, look, do it individually through quiet reflection, jot down the biggest ideas you can think of. Here are some things you should consider. What we start doing, what we stop doing, and suggestions from activists, leaders, etc. If I can ask you to mute, that would be really helpful. So after this part, after the, I think, Deborah, you keep going to mute. I hope you finally go. Now, after this first part, which is quite important, we then push them again. We push them into thinking even more transformationally around these ideas. So they've now jotted down in this previous exercise. They have jotted down on a yellow post-it note the ideas that have been coming up for them through these questions. You know, we change this, we move towards this, we do more of this, we do less of this, we move away from X or Y. They start writing down these big ideas. Now we put them into groups. And now these groups, this part of the activity is perhaps the most fiery, the most engaging and dynamic part of most of the workshops I've run, because we ask people to now embody particular stakeholders in that group. So if an individual company is representing the ideas they've just generated in the last steps, well, everyone else around them, all the other 3, 4, or 5 members of that group are representing impacted stakeholders. Now, it's important that the company helps decide, the individual decides, well, what are some of the most relevant stakeholders here? It could be, you know, if they're in agriculture, it could be the soil. If they're, you know, in manufacturing, it could be their employees or workers in their supply chain. If it's, you know, someone producing critical services or products, it could be their customers that needs to be, you know, critical, you know, to that process, or the forests and the rivers that are impacted by them, or the communities that are impacted, whatever it might be. They help decide, okay, so different members of this group are going to, sorry, Gabriel, I think you've gone on off mute again. It's quite important that they choose stakeholders that are really critical to the impacts of the business. Now, each of those individuals are now going to represent the perspectives of that stakeholder in the discussion. So they're going to hear the ideas from the individual of their company, of the kinds of ideas that they might need to pursue. And they're going to then respond saying, hey, look, that sounds great, but it looks like you're going to destroy jobs in your supply chain. You know, I represent the workers in the supply chain. Or, you know, hey, that sounds great, but have you thought about, you've moved your impact now from, you know, this part of the forest to some other river somewhere else? Or it might, you know, you start to sort of bring out a bit of debate and discussion, including some of the tensions that emerge between different stakeholders, and including some commercial stakeholders we have there as well. And it's absolutely useful to include at least one ecological, one social stakeholder, and one commercial one. It could be customers, investors, commercial partners as well, just to bring that in. One stakeholder group that can be really powerful here to select is also future generations. And I've used the challenge to people representing future generations in these exercises to just consider, what would future generations make of our excuses for not acting? What would they make of our various excuses that we have for not acting, for not taking action? Just as a way to get a bit more of a debate and discussion into this. Now, we also ask people to make sure that they embody this. They really embody, you know, the perspective and the interests of those stakeholders. And through that, you end up creating quite a few useful ideas that hopefully sharpen what already emerged, or new ideas get on the table. And through that, we end up with this kind of a diagram. So the consumer goods company, the same one from earlier that now we're following throughout this tool and all the parts in it. Well, they might decide, hey, look, we've in taking in the consideration of the local river, the discharge water is going to be cleaner than the water that comes in. Or in considering, for instance, the perspective of workers in the supply chain, they might be saying, look, the prices that we pay to our suppliers are going to allow and enable a double of a living wage for people to earn double the bare essentials they need to meet their basic needs. Or that in order to enable that, we're going to have really long-term contracts with our suppliers. Long-term contracts that have social, ecological outcomes that are at the center of it with 10-year commitments, for instance. So these are the kinds of ideas that we expect will be generated, and they're ambitious, fairly high level as well, and a lot of these can be broken down. And we have had some comments that actually some people get quite excited about the ideas they generate and would also like to come up with an implementation plan for how to pursue these alongside what they're going to generate in terms of redesigning their business. And that's definitely the kind of thing that you could work on, an implementation plan for these sorts of ideas. We don't have guidance for that specifically. We might be working on something, but nothing imminent at the moment. But definitely, hopefully these are exciting ideas that they generated and embodied through these exercises. The example with the professional services company as well is really interesting. They might end up saying, look, we're going to share some of our revenues with our communities, or we're going to have lower fees for the highest positive impact clients. We might also discontinue work with specific unethical clients. We don't want to work and facilitate the success and the continuation of certain industries or certain businesses. We might link staff bonuses to positive impacts. We might also, controversially for some, because some professional services firms are tax advisors as well, but we ourselves are going to pay our fair share of tax. We're not going to minimize tax. And we're not going to support our clients to minimize tax either. We're going to support them to pay their fair share of tax, for instance. So those sorts of ideas that will be challenging to their design of their business, the design of their enterprise, and to some of the financial expectations maybe they have already generated, but also critical for them to help humanity into the donut. So having discovered all of these ideas, we hope it allows them to now get to a point where they're ready to really unlock how the deep design of the business deals with these kinds of ideas. That's the point, is to almost stress test the design of the business by coming up with the biggest ideas possible through these exercises. And hopefully by being nudged several times, they now got to a point where actually I can see there are some things we haven't put on the table that we should and could put on the table. So I will just go through the last couple of slides here. There's a wrap-up slide as well that allows you to reflect on where we've gone to and where the exercises will now head to. And the final part, or the next part, will be how to now evaluate the deep design of the business based on the ideas that we've just generated. So that's why that section, those part 2 activities, are so critical. It's going to inform everything else that we do from here on out.